with U.S. agribusiness that relies on a huge government subsidy, thanks to Ronald Reagan's free market enthusiasms. Well, there's nothing at all surprising about what followed next. In 1995, U.S. aid wrote a report pointing out, I'm quoting it, that the export-driven trade and investment policy that Washington mandated will relentlessly squeeze the domestic rice farmer. In fact, the neoliberal policies rammed down Haiti's throat, destroyed, dismantled what was left of economic sovereignty, drove the country into chaos, and that was accelerated by Bush #2's banning of international aid on totally cynical grounds. In February 2004, the two traditional torturers of Haiti, France and the United States, combined to back a military coup and send President Aristide off to Africa. The U.S. denies him permission to return to the entire region. Haiti had by then lost the capacity to feed itself, making it highly vulnerable to food price fluctuation. That was the immediate cause of the 2008 food crisis, which led to riots and enormous protests, but not getting food. The story's familiar, in fact, quite similar in much of the world. So going back to the Bangladesh newspaper, it's true enough that the food crisis results from a Western lack of concern. A pittance by our standards would overcome its worst immediate effects. But more fundamentally, it results from the dedication to Adam Smith's principles of business-run state policy. These are all matters that we too easily evade. They happen daily, along with the fact that bailing out banks is not uppermost in the minds of the billion people now facing starvation, not forgetting the tens of millions enduring hunger in the richest country in the world. Well, also sidelined is an easy way to make a significant dent in the financial and the food crises. It's suggested by the publication a couple of days ago of the authoritative annual report on military spending by SIPRI, the Swedish Peace Research Institute. The scale of military spending is phenomenal, regularly increasing this last year as well. The U.S. is responsible for almost as much as the rest of the world combined, 7 times as much as its nearest rival, China. No need to waste time commenting. This distribution of concerns reflects another crisis here, kind of a cultural crisis. That is the tendency to focus on short-term parochial gains. That's a core element of our socioeconomic institutions and the ideological support system on which they rest. One example, now prominent, is the array of perverse incentives that are devised for corporate managers to enrich themselves. For example, what's called the too big to fail insurance policies that are provided by the unwitting public, and deeper ones that are just inherent in market inefficiencies. One such inefficiency, now recognized to be one of the roots of the financial crisis, is the underpricing of systemic risk, the risk that affects the whole system. So, for example, and that's general, like if you and I make a transaction, say you sell me a car, we may make a good deal for ourselves, but we don't price into that transaction the cost to others. And there's a cost. Pollution, congestion, raising the price of gas, all sorts of other things, killing people in Nigeria because we're getting the gas from them. That doesn't count when we don't count that in. That's an inherent market inefficiency, one of the reasons why markets can't work. And when you turn to the financial institutions, can get quite serious. So it means that, say, Goldman Sachs, if they're managed properly, if they make a risky loan, they calculate the potential cost to themselves if the loan goes bad, but they simply don't calculate the impact on the whole financial system. And we now see how severe that can be. Not that it's anything new. In fact, this inherent deficiency of markets, this inefficiency of markets is perfectly well known. 10 years ago, at the height of the euphoria about efficient markets, two prominent economists, John Eatwell and Lance Taylor, they wrote an important book called Global Finance at Risk, in which they spelled out the consequences of these market inefficiencies, which we now see, and they outlined means to deal with them. These proposals were exactly contrary to the deregulatory rage that was then being carried forward by the Clinton administration under the leadership of those who Obama has now called upon to put Band-Aids on the disaster that they helped create. Well, in substantial measure, the food crisis plaguing much of the South and the financial crisis of the North have common roots, namely the shift towards neoliberalism since the 1970s. That brought to an end the post-war, post-Second World War Bretton Woods system that was instituted by the United States and Britain right after World War II. It had two architects, John Maynard Keynes, Britain, and Harry Dexter White in the United States, and they anticipated that its core principles, which included capital controls and regulated currencies, they anticipated that these principles would lead to relatively balanced economic growth and would also free governments to institute the social democratic programs, welfare state programs, that had enormous public support around the world. And to a large extent, they were vindicated on both counts. In fact, many economists call the years that followed until the 1970s the golden age of capitalism. That golden age led not only to unprecedented and relatively egalitarian growth, but also the introduction of welfare state measures. Keynes and White were perfectly well aware that free capital movement and speculation inhibit these options. Professional economics literature points out, what should be obvious, that the free flow of capital creates what they sometimes call a virtual senate of lenders and investors who carry out a moment-by-moment referendum on government policies, and if they find that they're irrational, meaning they help people instead of profits, then they vote against them by capital flight, by tax on the country, and so on. So the democratic governments have a dual constituency, their own population and the virtual Senate, who typically prevail. And for the poor, that means regular disaster. In fact, one of the differences, one of the reasons for the radical difference between Latin America and East Asia in the last half century is that Latin America didn't control capital flight. In fact, in general, the rich in Latin America don't have responsibilities. Capital flight approximated the crushing debt. In contrast, during South Korea's remarkable growth period, capital flight was not only banned, but could bring the death penalty, one of many factors that led to the surprising divergence. Latin America has much richer resources. You'd expect it to be far more advanced than East Asia.